Tonight, you're going to remember something that never happened to you. Not a dream, not a hallucination, a real vivid memory, complete with smell, light, emotion of an event you did not live through. And the strangest part, you won't even notice. See, your memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Every time you reach back into your past, your brain does not press play on a saved file. It rebuilds the scene from fragments, pieces of emotion, sensory data, narrative logic, and stitches them together into something that feels true. The problem is that some of those fragments do not belong to you. They belong to your ancestors. This is not a metaphor. This is not philosophy. This is one of the most unsettling discoveries in the science of memory, epigenetics, and evolutionary psychology. And it changes everything you think you know about who you are. Start with the basics. Memory, as your brain experiences it, is a process called reconsolidation. Every time you remember something, you are not retrieving a fixed record. You are actively rewriting it. Neuroscientist Karim Nader at McGill University demonstrated this in 2000 with a now famous series of experiments on rats. When a rat recalled a fearful memory, that memory briefly became unstable, almost liquid, before being stored again in a slightly altered form. The act of remembering changed the memory itself. What this means for you is profound. Every memory you have recalled more than once is not the original memory. It is a copy of a copy of a copy, each generation subtly altered by your current mood, your current beliefs, your current fears. But that is just the surface. Go deeper. In 2013, researchers Brian Diaz and Kerry Ressler at Emory University published a study that shook the field of genetics to its core. They trained mice to fear the smell of cherry blossoms, a neutral scent the mice had no prior reason to avoid, by pairing it with mild electric shocks. The mice developed a fear response. That part is standard behavioral conditioning. What happened next was not. The offspring of those mice who had never been shocked, mice who had never encountered the cherry blossom scent in any threatening context, were born afraid of it. Not mildly cautious. Afraid. Their nervous systems responded to the smell as though they had lived through the original trauma themselves. And when Diaz and Ressler examined the DNA of these mice, they found structural changes in the genes associated with the olfactory system, changes that corresponded precisely to the fear their parents had learned. The fear had been inherited, not through behavior, through biology. This is the science of epigenetics, the study of how experience changes not just the individual, but the genetic code passed to future generations. The word comes from the Greek epi, meaning above or beyond. Beyond genetics. The idea that what your grandparents survived is written in some form into the architecture of your body. Your ancestors hunted large animals across open plains. They crossed ice bridges in the dark. They survived plagues, famines, floods, and predators that no longer exist. Every human alive today is the descendant of every human who survived long enough to reproduce. You carry that selection in your cells. And you carry something else too. Psychologist Mark Vowlin, author of the landmark work on inherited family trauma, has spent decades documenting cases where people experience symptoms, fears, compulsions, recurring physical sensations that cannot be explained by anything in their own life history. A woman with a lifelong terror of water whose grandmother nearly drowned in a river. A man with an inexplicable fear of trains, whose great-uncle died in a railway accident during wartime. These patterns repeat generation after generation until someone names them. Vowlin's clinical framework, which draws on the field known as transgenerational trauma, proposes that unresolved emotional experiences in one generation can manifest as embodied, felt experience in the next, not as inherited stories, not as learned behavior, but as something that lives in the body and presents itself as personal memory. Here is where it gets strange. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, in his foundational research on trauma and the body, showed that traumatic memory is not stored the way ordinary memory is. Ordinary memory lives in narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, an end. You can tell it as a story. Traumatic memory lives in the body. It lives in the nervous system. It fires as sensation, as image, as sudden emotional overwhelm, not as a sequence of events, but as an eruption of experience that feels absolutely, terrifyingly present. Now combine that with what Diaz and Ressler found. If the body of your parent or grandparent encoded a traumatic experience at the level of their nervous system, at the level of their DNA, and passed structural traces of that encoding to you, then what you experience as your own emotional landscape may contain signals that originated in lives you never lived. Your fear of open water, your particular brand of anxiety in crowds, the inexplicable grief that comes on some evenings without cause. Your body is not always reporting on your present. It may be reporting on someone else's past. Consider what memory actually is from an evolutionary standpoint. Memory is a survival tool. Its purpose is not accuracy. Its purpose is prediction. Your brain stores past events so it can anticipate future threats. And in evolutionary terms, the threats that mattered most, famine, predators, social rejection, environmental catastrophe, were the same threats generation after generation. A nervous system that could transmit survival, critical warnings across generations would have had a significant selective advantage. You would not need to personally experience starvation to fear it. Your great-grandmother's hunger, encoded in her body and passed forward through epigenetic channels, becomes your anxiety around food. Her fear becomes your dream. Her loss becomes your unnamed grief. You have been living inside a story that began long before you were born. The human brain contains what researchers sometimes call implicit memory. Memory that exists below conscious access, memory that shapes your behavior and your emotional responses without ever presenting itself as a specific recollection. You cannot point to the moment you learned it. You cannot trace it to any event in your own life. It is simply there, as fundamental as your posture, as automatic as your breath. Some of that implicit memory is yours. Some of it arrived before you did. This reframes the question of identity in a way that is almost impossible to fully absorb. When you ask who you are asking about something that is not entirely individual. You are a node in a chain, a body built from the accumulated adaptations of thousands of bodies before yours. Your instincts, your fears, your inexplicable loves and inexplicable losses, they are not yours alone. They were forged in other lives, in other centuries, in other landscapes you have never seen. Anthropologist Paul Connerton, in his work on how societies remember, argues that memory is never purely private. It is social. It is bodily. It is transmitted through ritual, through posture, through the stories told at dinner tables across generations, and through something even older than language, something written into the physical structure of who we are before we are old enough to have stories of our own. Your ancestors' memories live in your body the way their bones built your bones. You did not choose them. You cannot delete them. You can only begin to recognize them, to hold them up to the light and say, this fear is older than me. This grief is not only mine. This story began somewhere I have never been and runs through me like a river that started in a country I have never visited. And when you do that, or when you begin to distinguish between what is yours and what was inherited, something shifts. Not because the inherited memory disappears, but because you stop confusing it for the present. You stop fighting ancient threats that no longer exist. You stop mourning losses that were not yours to carry. You begin for the first time to live in your own life. Tonight, You will remember something. You will feel something move through you, and you will call it yours. Maybe it is. Maybe it was passed to you through 40,000 years of survival, encoded in the body of someone who loved you before you existed, someone who carried something they could not name and gave it to the only people they could, the ones who came after. When the sun goes down tonight, something ancient is going to surface in you. Now you know where it came from.